is our second Project Search webinar. This webinar is recorded and will be archived. So we will send you an email when we've archived the webinar, and you will be able to get PDFs of the presentation as well. We will hold all questions to the end unless there is a technical difficulty, and you can use the chat box to let us know, and I will try to troubleshoot it for you. These webinars are hosted by HealthMatters program in partnership with Project Search and funded by the Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council. I just wanted to briefly introduce the webinar and then pass the presentation to our main speaker. The Suicide Prevention 101, the Perception of Happiness webinar we will learn what to look for in assessing your Project Search students and others for suicide risk. We will walk you through what to do when a student or anyone displays concerning behaviors and how to help them find resources and access those resources. We will also learn how to have the confidence to speak up, how to ask, and what to do if you do ask about someone's thoughts of suicide and they tell you they're thinking of suicide. Just to keep in mind that many studies on suicide do not address youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and yet suicidal thoughts, attempts, and death exist with this population, even if we do not see it or hear about it. The reality of this is that it is hard to screen for suicide for individuals with intellectual and developmental disability, and thus their struggle goes undetected. I wanted to also introduce our main speaker, Stephanie Crookston. She's a program manager with Project Search at UCHealth in Aurora, Colorado. Stephanie has a master's in psychology and 7 years of experience in mental health and supported employment. She has presented on numerous platforms regarding ADA and accommodations, leadership seminars, and working alongside employees with different abilities, suicide prevention, and mental health first aid at multiple professional conferences across the United States. All right, welcome, Stephanie. I'm going to pass the presentation to Stephanie, and she will take over.
Hello, everyone.
Right.
Hi. Thank you,
Hello.
everyone, for coming and being willing to learn about this topic. It'd be uncomfortable for many, but you being here and your willingness to learn can be the difference for somebody's life. So thank you very much for coming and being a part of this webinar. Today, your takeaways are pretty simple. You'll learn why suicide awareness and prevention matters, and you'll be given the tools to help anyone experiencing thoughts of suicide, no matter their learning abilities. One of the things that I do want to talk about, this is a different platform, so when I'm teaching face-to-face, we talk a lot about confidentiality and learning agreements. And as we go through some of the things that we're talking about with suicide and suicide awareness that you personally might not agree with, and that's okay. I remember learning different facts about suicide and suicide awareness and prevention, and being giving some pushback with some of the things that I was learning, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the things that you're going to learn today in this webinar. So to get started, we're going to talk a little bit about what is suicide. So it's a definition of the intentional taking of one's life. You're going to hear me say die by suicide very, very often. I say die by suicide, and the suicide prevention community says die by suicide often instead of committed suicide, because committed suicide implies that a person has performed a criminal act, and it was a criminal act prior to the late 19th century, but it is not that anymore. We want to look at it as a person having a psychiatric emergency as opposed to committing something like committing murder or adultery. So we're trying to change the way that we're looking at these about these words. It took me 3 years to say die by suicide, so don't panic if you're talking to somebody about it and you say committed suicide. Just keep practicing. You'll get better and better as you go along, just being aware of that. You can also say the individual killed themselves. I don't prefer to say that. It just kind of makes my stomach feel a little queasy. The easier way for me is die by suicide. It comes out a little bit easier. So say whatever feels most natural to you. So we're going to continue on about myths and facts about suicide. If this is supposed to be, if you talk about suicide, you're basically giving the person the idea or encouraging to do that. If you don't already know, that is a myth. So the reason, this is one of the biggest misconceptions with suicide prevention and suicide is that if you're talking about it, you're giving them the idea. The reality is you're not. We live in a world that we're connected. We're constantly hearing about stuff. If I bring up something like Robin Williams, we know about him and his life and his death, and this isn't something that's brand new. So talking about it actually will relieve pressure for many people, and being able to kind of share their feelings. Most say that they would not have attempted had they had the ability to share what it was that they were feeling. The next myth is once somebody has made up their mind that they want to die by suicide, there's no stopping them. And the reality of this is that you can intervene at any time. If you haven't heard of Kevin Baratheia or Kevin Briggs, there are two Kevins that Kevin Briggs worked at the Golden Gate Bridge and he helped individuals who were attempting suicide off the bridge. And there is a very powerful picture of him and Kevin Baratheia, who was on the other side of the railing of this bridge, and Kevin is just talking to him. He's one step away, but Kevin's just there and he's with them. So you can intervene right up at any time, and just know if you want to look into Kevin Briggs and Kevin Baratheia's story, they're exceptionally powerful to learn about, and is a definite symbol of hope if you're looking at that picture, if you know what I'm talking about. If not, I encourage you to look into that. The next myth is suicide is not that big of a deal. This has become more and more prominent. Suicide is becoming something that we are all hearing about almost on a daily basis. In 2017, in Colorado, which is where I'm from, it was the second leading cause of death for individuals between the ages of 15 and 44. And it's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And so it impacts $1.5 billion of productivity in the United States. 47,000 individuals died by suicide. 1.4 million have attempted. And all of these, this data and information is on the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention website that you can look at. That's at the bottom of the page. And you can go and check out what's going on in your state, and I encourage you to do that. On average, there are about 129 suicides per day, and globally, so it's 11 people, it's 1 person, 11 people, 1 person per 11 minutes. So this 45-minute webinar, there's 4 to 5 individuals that will die by suicide. And globally, it's 1 person per 40 seconds, which is about 60-something individuals dying by suicide per day globally, which is a significant problem we have to find a way to help these individuals who are suffering. If you want to put this in perspective for you, most of us have been on an airplane. Most common airplane that we are on is the 737, holds about 135 passengers. And imagine, the outcry and the things that would happen if a plane of this size crashed every single day and killed almost every single person on board every single day. There would be outrage. People would be trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And I can assure you a lot of us are in the suicide prevention community are trying to do just that, but we need individuals like you that are out in the world living your life, being able to help individuals be able to work through their crises. And in this webinar, you're going to learn just how to do that to help not only your students through Project Search, or people in your life, your family, the people that you care about, or sometimes even helping yourself get through some of these exceptional, like some of these really hard times and some of the things that are going on with people. This is a map of the United States to kind of give you an idea. So find your state on the map and see as of 2014 where and how dark blue or not blue your state is. This map I really actually like looking at because it makes me think about some of the reasons why Colorado might be that dark blue state. And the suicide rate is a lot higher in Colorado than it is in a lot of other states. I believe we're ranked 7 nationally, 7 or 10. And, you know, there has been a lot of different studies and things released about why these western states that you see that are all dark blue have a higher rate of suicide. And some of those include things like we have more access to guns and firearms, or we have a lot more rural communities that don't have the saturation for the mental health help that some individuals need. There was a study done on altitude in the brain and how that might affect suicidal ideation, which was interesting. But there's a lot that, you know, you look at this map and, you know, you look at places like California and New York and these very richly populated states, thinking about why, you know, their suicide rates are lower than the national average, and what your state is doing to help with that kind of stuff, or what kind of populations you're serving and what you have available to you. They think that these rates are a little bit skewed for a couple different reasons. If you notice, there are lighter blues along the Bible Belt communities in the southern regions of the United States. And for a long time, we've known that religion and spirituality is a deterrent for suicide. So, you know, you don't want to die by suicide, otherwise you're going to go to hell, and that's a deterrent for a lot of people. And that's also kind of the way that individuals, when somebody dies by any type of means, whether it be, you know, one car accidents or single car accidents or overdoses, we don't know if they're intentional or not. We don't know what the single car accident, what the intention was with that. And so some of these numbers that could be suicides are not being documented as suicides. So these numbers might be a little bit lower simply because of that data that we're not getting. You know, some individuals think that if we write down suicide on their coroner report that they're going to hell, so we're going to try and find a different means by which they died. And so that's something that happens all along the United States, simply because, you know, people are compassionate. They want to be here, and they don't want to believe that people are suffering in such a way. So this is just kind of a map that you can look at. This is also available at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. You can look at your state and see the numbers for your particular state. So we're going to move on from all the data. That's a lot of numbers, a lot of scary data facts about individuals who are suffering. So we can all just kind of take a deep breath now and just kind of go, how can I help? This is a very serious epidemic. How can I help somebody who's experiencing some suicidal ideation, or how will I know? What will I do? So we're going to talk about some of the risk factors. And I want to preface this really quick by saying that these lists can be long and deep, and there's a lot to a lot of these lists that we're looking at. So you can you can be withdrawn from activities but still not be thinking about suicide. These are just kind of risk factors to be aware of. And there's something that I'm going to tie in at the end after we talk about all these risk factors to help you kind of put all of that in perspective. Because I know that learning about suicide prevention and the scary realities of all of that and what people we care about are suffering through, and then adding all of these risk factors can be exceptionally overwhelming. So I want to try and make this as less overwhelming as possible. So we'll kind of go through these risk factors to be aware of. These are some of the very prominent risk factors. Depression and other mental health disorders. We'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in the next slide. Project Search, if you were at the conference this last summer, we talked about how we are experiencing a higher number of young adults, and in our adult programs as well, a higher number of mental health individuals that are coming through. So that's something that we need to be on the lookout for when we are taking on our young adults and our adults into these programs. Other risk factors include alcohol or drug increased use of those things, looking for ways to kill themselves, reckless, acting reckless, hopelessness, giving away your prized possessions or their prized possessions. A lot of times that looks like a pet. So they have a pet that they love that's a prized possession for them. Visiting or calling people, saying goodbye. So these are some of the things that you want to look out for. And again, like I said, you'll have access to all this information, and we're going to kind of have this make a little bit more sense in the next couple of slides. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the depression piece of all of this. So the depression disorder lasts for more than 2 weeks and basically affects all aspects of an individual's life. So emotions, relationships, physical well-being, ability to work, and ability to carry out daily activities. So within Project Search, we see a lot of this, their inability to come into the program to carry out their daily activities. It is the leading mental health disorder linked to suicide among all populations. That includes our intellectual and developmental disabilities, different autism, all those different. Depression is still the leading mental health disorder linked to all of these populations. So the things that we want to look out for in addition, the depression affects your emotions while at work, and that could sometimes look like anger and rage, sadness. Kind of apathy was one of some of the big ones. I don't care one way or the other. I don't care if this happens or it doesn't happen. Kind of being flippant about those, pushing people away. Those relationships that you build at Project Search are you're with people every day, and so building those relationships is part of what we do just naturally. But if you start seeing relationships getting affected, that might be an indication of the person might be experiencing some sorts of depression disorder, episodic depression, and affecting their ability to work and carry out their daily activities. And physical well-being is some of those in addition to where, we might have some chronic pain or some other things that might be going on with our young adults and our adults in the program that we might want to look into as well. In continuing with the trend of risk factors that we've already talked about, which I know is getting to be a really long and overwhelming list, we'll talk a little bit about our environmental risk factors. So we have stressful life events, including death, divorce, or job loss. So job loss and death and divorce are definitely something that does happen to the interns that we have. Our grief responses for our DD and ID populations is often delayed by months and sometimes years, so you might not be getting the response that you want from your young adult when something traumatic is happening, and that's just part of their grief response. So if you are aware that something has happened with that young adult in the past and that you're kind of on the lookout for that process, sometimes the grief will come up a year, 6 months or so down the line. So just kind of be aware that might be something that might pop in. prolonged stress factors, and I know a lot of our young adults experience some type of harassment and bullying and relationship problems, as well as unemployment. I mean, that's the part of the business that we're in, is to help them get a job, and forming those relationships when it's been a challenge for some, and sticking up for yourself, and self-advocacy is part of what, makes it all, makes all this project search stuff come together for them. So just understanding that we are aware that these are some of the stress factors that our young adults come in contact with on the daily. Other things like access to lethal means, including firearms and drugs, it just kind of depends on what part, kind of what's going on in around in your area. Exposure to another person's suicide or graphic sensationalization of accounts of suicide. This is something that is becoming a hot button topic, if you would, in terms of, well, what do you think about that TV show on Netflix? And I will tell you that I haven't watched it yet, but it isn't something that I plan on watching. That I don't think that making it in any form something that's glamorous or something that you'll live in infamy for is something that I don't really appreciate. So it's not something that I personally am going to watch, and I don't think that it's helpful for other individuals to watch, no matter what you put at the end of that message. But I will say that is my opinion, and so if you have a different opinion, then that's fine. That's just how I feel, and I get asked that question quite a bit when I get to this particular part of risk factors. Suicide isn't something that is glamorous or pretty or infamous or anything like that. Somebody is suffering and they need help, and we need to be the person that can either ask the question or get them the help that they need. And another environmental risk factor that we talked about as well was that lack of social supports and healthcare supports, especially in the rural communities. We don't have access to mental health treatment or any type of even like physical treatment. So, 6 hours to get to the nearest hospital, and it snowed, and I'm not going out there. Those types of things. I don't have the means. I don't have a car to get out there. So those lack of supports can really be an increased risk factor for some of these populations. So, in addition to some of this, we'll talk in a little bit about how we kind of wrap all this up. But having a previous suicide attempt and substance misuse, as well as a mental health condition and chronic pain, you'll be at a significantly increased risk, and I'll tell you why in the next slide. Also, increased populations are our LGBTQI community and our Latina youth, and that's some of those more common things that we know about where, it's stigmatized, and some of the young adults, Latina young adults that I've worked with in the past have spoken about not being able to talk about their mental health experiences based on cultural differences between them and their family members or their parents. So these particular subgroups tend to see increased suicide attempts and suicide deaths. So that was, like I said, a really, really kind of, and this is a less longer list than what I've seen elsewhere, but it's a pretty long list of things that you have to look out for. And those can be exceptionally overwhelming, because it's a lot. Like, you have some person that is experiencing a majority of those items on the list, job loss, a grief, going through some grief or whatever's going on with them, and, still not be thinking about suicide. So one of the things that I like to add to the slides of when I'm teaching suicide prevention is this slide. Thomas Joyner is a suicidologist, and he has written some really great books on the subject of suicide. One of my favorites is Why People Die by Suicide. It really helped me when my roommate died by suicide in 2014. It really kind of helped me put some stuff in perspective. Even I did have my master's degree in psychology back then, so was certainly beating myself up for not being able to help him more. But this really helped me put some of that really long listy stuff that we just went through into some perspective. So there are 3 things that you're looking at on this picture, and you see perceived burdensomeness, the thwarted belongingness, and the acquired capacity for suicide. So the perceived burdensomeness we're going to go through first. The burdensomeness is their perception of them being a burden. So this has nothing to do with you or how you feel about, like, for example, my roommate felt that he was a burden to us because he didn't have a job and he was really going through some struggles. I did not think that he was a burden. I was happy to help him. It wasn't a big deal, but for him, it was very perceived by him that he was a burden. There was nothing I could tell him to say that he wasn't. So it was all about what was happening for him in his mind and his eyes. So this isn't about how you feel about something. This is how they feel about something. Just be really clear about that. So the next thing we'll talk about is the thwarted belongingness. So this is kind of, you don't belong where you once belonged. So again, this is something that our young adults could go through, where we had friends in our school for, as long as we had them our whole life, and then I went to Project Search and I don't belong in that group of friends anymore, and I'm trying to belong in this new group of friends. Those thwarted belongingness, where I don't belong where I used to belong. Job loss is a big one. Losing friends through a divorce or something else. Those types of events where you used to belong in this group and now you feel like you don't belong. So that's kind of what those 2 big items means, and they can exist, by themselves. It doesn't have to be a suicidal ideation or desire for suicide for either one of these. You can feel like you're a burden and not belong at the same time and still have no desire for suicide. One of the things that sets it all aside in that and creates that orangey red that you see is the acquired capacity for suicide. And what acquired capacity means, and it's going to sound a little bit insensitive, but it's basically practice for suicide. And what I mean when I say that is, that's why a previous suicide attempt is one of the leading indicators, is because basically that person knows and understands what happened to them after they attempted suicide, and they're less afraid of dying by suicide than what they were before they tried. So, I have done this thing, and I know that the outcome isn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. So that's why attempts in the past are one of the leading indicators, is because they have acquired the capacity to perform that. So those are the 3 main, and when they overlap, they're at a higher risk for suicide and suicide attempt. So if we're thinking about like that long list that we were just going through, we have an individual who, has some of these risk factors, right? So they are perceived burden on their family due to their disability or their inability to do something that they feel like their family needs them to do. We've had that in the past, so they feel like they're a burden to their family because of their disability, and that they don't belong in the community as a whole, or that they had a small community of people that they cared about that no longer exists anymore. Those 2 things together, in addition to things like the acquired capacity for suicide, so they've attempted in the past, or they've had started behaving recklessly in areas that they normally haven't. That could be a strong indicator for you when you're looking out for something like that, for a suicide attempt or suicidal thoughts. So I hope that this all this information and kind of tightening up a little bit with the perceived burdensomeness and the thwarted belongingness has helped you a little bit kind of navigate some of the things that you might be looking at and the people you might be thinking about while you're taking this course, and kind of saying, okay, looking at these things, this is easier for me to be able to identify somebody and all that, which is, you're like, that's great. I can identify. I feel a little bit more comfortable identifying. What the heck do I do with all of that information? Well, I'm gonna tell you. So if you have identified somebody that you think might be of risk for suicide, if you take anything away from this course, take this away. If you feel like somebody is thinking about suicide, you need to ask them about it. You have to ask. If you don't ask somebody and they die by suicide, I can tell you from personal experience, not saying anything will beat you up more than the torment of how the heck am I going to ask this person I care about, or somebody I don't even know? How am I supposed to help them? How am I supposed to get through to them? And that's a scary thing. I've asked individuals about their thoughts on suicide hundreds of times since 5 years ago, and it's just been something that I have made it my mission to help individuals try and help other people to decrease the rate of suicide, and trying to help people feel empowered to ask the question, because it is hard. But I implore you to ask, to always ask if you're not sure. And I'm going to give you some examples on how to ask. Some people are really afraid to ask. There's a couple of reasons why you might be afraid. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to hear the answer yes. Yes, I'm thinking about dying by suicide. It's something that's exceptionally scary. And also other people are afraid of asking because they don't want the person to get upset with them, to start a fight, or to be uncomfortable in that, and people, having those feelings around asking about suicide. So this is why I've learned how to ask through many different channels, and the ways that I found it to be the most helpful is to identify the facts and the things that you know to be true. So the example that I have up here is, Wilma, I've noticed you've not really been enjoying your cooking like you once did, and you seem very sad, and you tell me that you're sad when I ask you how you are. I'm worried about you. Are you thinking about suicide? So you've laid out this foundation of, here are the reasons why I'm asking you. I'm not just showing up and saying, hey, are you thinking about suicide, with no context, with no background about how you got to this particular thought. So, and it's the same here with Fred. People who have gone through a similar situation, like losing a parent, have thoughts of suicide. So you can interject anything that's going on with this person. So, Wilma, I've noticed you haven't been enjoying blank, and Fred, people who have gone through a similar thing have thought about suicide. That normalizes the experience for them, and it gives them a reason to know, why you're asking. There is the thing that I want to say too as well is, if you're asking about suicide, it really matters how you say it. If you have this look on your face that I am not ready to hear the answer to whatever this is, I don't think, and they're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to look at you and go, well, they can't handle what I have to say, so I'm just going to say nope. And if you ask in a way that seems like the answer that I'm going to get from you is super annoying, please don't tell me the truth, they're not going to tell you the truth. So you have to really come from a place from your heart and acknowledgement that this person is suffering, and whether or not you understand their suffering or why they're thinking about suicide is irrelevant. In a way, you kind of have to kind of set that aside and really focus on what's going on with your face and how you're saying these words. And so it's really helpful if you practice. And I've looked at myself in the mirror and have practiced a lot, and I will tell you that I have a twitch, and so I have to really be aware of that twitch and saying I'm not going to, I'm going to suppress that twitch, and being aware that that's what's going on. So you're not giving the person an indication to not be truthful, because you want to know the truth, even though it's hard. It's definitely not something that you want to hear. So when you do ask the question and somebody answers yes, nobody on planet Earth is gonna feel good about that. We all have that moment where we go, oh gosh. So you need to just remember, when the answer is yes, it's okay to not feel good about it, but just take a deep breath. And I know that it's really hard to know what to say, and it's okay to not know what to say. But what's really important is to acknowledge that it takes a lot of courage for people to be vulnerable in a lot of capacities in life. And suicide and thoughts of suicide is no different from that. In fact, it is a significant vulnerability and acknowledgement of their feelings about something. So letting them know, thank you so much for trusting me enough to tell me how you're feeling. And if you don't know what to say, then just say, I don't know what to say right now, but I'm here for you. Those types of answers or those types of responses are okay. But it's just really important to acknowledge, what's happening in that moment, because it doesn't feel like it, but you're receiving a gift. This person is giving you the gift of the opportunity to help them, and you're being put in that situation because they trust you enough to tell you how they're feeling. And if this was your sister talking to somebody and, they went, oh, thank you so much for trusting me enough to tell me how you're feeling, and they helped your sister or they helped your brother or they helped your best friend, you would appreciate that. What you wouldn't appreciate is the exact opposite, right? If somebody couldn't even ask and then couldn't even acknowledge how hard that must have been for your sister or somebody to share in that experience. So just really knowing that you're getting, even though it's a really complex and it's hard. This is not something that's really easy, something that you should just be ready for at all times, and it's going to feel natural and okay every time this happens, because it doesn't. But just knowing, being in that moment with that person and helping that person, acknowledging that the struggle is real. Even if you don't understand what's going on with them, that they shared something with you, and that now in this moment you have an opportunity to help them. So you've gotten to the point where you've asked that question and you've gotten a yes, and you've acknowledged, oh man, thank you for trusting me enough to tell me how you're feeling. Some of the next things that I want to go over is kind of some of those things might be a little hard because your brain is racing. Oh my God, somebody just told me something really important. But it's really, that's why I tell you to take a deep breath. Actively listen to what this person is telling you. Make eye contact. If you don't understand something, repeating back what they're saying. And asking if they have a plan. I will tell you, if you are at this point and you're really uncomfortable and you don't know and you don't want to ask the question, or you don't want to ask about their plan, find somebody that can do that, and that can be somebody from the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that can be your supervisor, that can be anybody that you know. I want you to be the person that feels okay to say, Wilma, are you thinking about suicide? And if they say yes, you can feel comfortable enough to be able to get that information and offer encouragement, right? So I'm on your team, I'm here for you, and just sit there and listen, because a lot of times people just need somebody to just sit there and listen. A lot of things that we know that aren't helpful is the shaming piece. A lot of people go, oh my God, you do not have it that bad. You get a grip. I heard that a lot. How could you do that to people who love you? You'd be ruining their lives. Shame, shame, shame. You don't want to do that. You don't want to make somebody feel like they're a burden for telling you about something like this, right? You want to be able to say, I'm on your team, I'm here for you, listening to what they have to say. Don't shame or blame or say, oh, well, I have this great therapist that can definitely help you because you have some significant issues that you have to work through. It's not about you. It's about them and what they need, because we all need different stuff. We all need, some of us go to church to get spiritual help. Some of us don't. Some of us go to therapists and don't take any meds, and some of us take medication and don't go to therapists. I mean, we're all different, and we have to figure out what's best for this person, not what's best for you to make you feel better in this experience, because it's about taking time and offering some guidance. So you can ask what they think might be helpful for them right now. If they don't know, you can say, would you like to hear about some of the things that I have found helpful? You might get a yes or no for that, but don't shove your opinions and thoughts about what it is they're experiencing down their throat. Just actively listen. If they have a plan, then working through that with the crisis helpline, which I'll give you information about here in a second. Sometimes in these moments, you question the person's honesty about it, whether or not they're being truthful, whether or not that no is really a no. And sometimes your spidey senses are going to be going off and you're like, I just don't feel good about this. And if something doesn't feel right, I would encourage you to not let it go, and not let it go in the sense of, I'm not sure how I feel about this because, I'm not sure that what you're saying is truthful because of all of these things, and the things that setting those facts down and saying, this is what I've seen, and I'm worried. And your answer does not have me convinced, and I care about you. It is okay to set boundaries. Don't leave somebody who's suicidal alone, so make sure you're getting somebody there. And, sometimes this is the police. And a lot of people, this is something that people kind of go through, and this isn't, you are the master of your own boundaries. You know what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. My boundaries might be a little bit different than yours, but just know that you can set those boundaries. So, if a person's refusing help, they've admitted, that they're thinking about suicide, and they're like, no, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to talk to my brother. I don't want you to call my sister. You might not be the person that they want to talk to. You have, because you're in that situation, I encourage you to really think about the boundaries that you want to set with that and say, you know what, I care about you enough. I need to set some of these boundaries because I'm really uncomfortable walking away. So we either can call the crisis prevention helpline, or we can call 911. Which of the two would you like to do? And I don't know about some of your states, but in Colorado they have mental health individuals that go along with the police officers here in a lot of the different counties that we have. And we just identify that it's a mental health concern that we're having with an individual, and they won't show up, sirens going and make a huge ruckus, which is traumatic in its own right. So I know that Colorado offers that. I am not sure about other states, but just know that you can set boundaries. You don't have to do or say anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, like going into anybody's house or engaging with somebody that you don't know that you might be worried about. That you can set those boundaries and call professionals to help you. One of the last things I want to talk about is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Some people get really nervous about calling these guys. I have called them numerous times, both personally and professionally. When I teach classes, sometimes I'll just call so people know what it sounds like because it's really helpful. Some people get really nervous about calling them, and they're really highly trained. But when you call, there's a couple things that I need you to keep in mind. As far as I know right now, because this could change in the future, when you call the system, ask if you're a veteran, and that's just because they have a different funding service. Number two, they direct your call based on area code. So I know that if I were visiting family in Montana, if I had to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and I called from my phone that had a 303 area code, it would direct me to somebody that's closest to me in Colorado. So just make sure that you know that that's that's something that you would that you need, and it takes a couple seconds. You're just like, I need to clarify that I'm in Montana, and it would take them a couple seconds to just transfer you to a different person that's closer to you in case they need to do mobile crisis services to check on people. They're amazing, and a lot of our young adults really like the chat sessions, that they can chat with somebody instead of having to make the phone call, and I have those in the blue link below. You can click on it and it'll go right to where you need to be. So I understand that that was an incredible amount of information, a lot of data, and I can see questions popping up, but I don't know, Jasmina, if you want me to answer them directly or if you wanted to handle that any different. But I am definitely open for questions.
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie, so much. Yes, it looks like some of the questions may be coming to you directly, so I cannot see the questions. So you can read the question out loud and start answering them, and I will see if others pop up as you're answering. And so feel free to put in any questions that you have, and we will answer them. Thanks, Stephanie.
Sure. I think it looks like I have, let's see, one question, and it says, do you have any suggestions for differentiating negative language and actual threat of suicide, specifically for individuals on the autism spectrum who may use language like this as a tic or an anxiety outlet? This is a really good question. Thank you so much for asking this, because it is definitely something that we work on our young adults with. When I worked in the high schools to teach this type of stuff to young adults in different high schools all over Colorado, one of the things that came up so often was that our young adults was using the wrong language to get the attention that they felt that they needed, right? And so what would happen was they would get embarrassed by something and they would use the vernacular like, oh, I could just kill myself right now, which is definitely not something we want them to use, because the reality of that is you're feeling embarrassed, is that the fact of what's going on with you right now, is that you're feeling embarrassed. And so one of the things that we do with our young adults is we really try to help them utilize a different language. So they may say it, I encourage just always asking the question, kind of probing a little bit more and saying, what you're feeling, is it more this? Is it more that you're anxious? Is it more that you're frustrated? Is it more that, and not having this huge reaction, because a lot of our young adults get a pretty significant reaction when they say, oh, I should just kill myself right now. And a lot of, if we're getting that same language from the same person over and over, we kind of get numb to it. But if we're never hearing it and then all of a sudden we're hearing it, we can have a gross overreaction. And instead of just, being very calm and kind of saying, okay, let's have this conversation and let's really dig in to how we can practice you getting away from that type of language or that tic. And so you're not getting that response. You're not getting the overreaction, and just saying, hey, let's talk about the language here. Let's acknowledge your feelings. Let's move forward through this. I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to message me again. But that's my answer to that particular question.
Thanks, Stephanie. We have another question that came through. I'm the instructional assistant for our Project Surge program, and we do have an intern who displays some of these risk factors. I'm a firm believer of asking if you see these things, but I am concerned that I may be crossing boundaries because I'm not a licensed professional in our district. What are my options?
So my answer to that would be, if you want to approach it with somebody, if you're uncomfortable, my gut reaction for that is just as a member of the human race and as somebody that is a part of all of that, we have an obligation, if we know that we're concerned about something, to say something and to ask. If you're feeling like it's a more professional boundaries where you don't want to step on the toes of other people, you can ask with a professional from the district that's around. I don't know if you have a mental health individual that comes or that is able to team up with you on that question, but I always feel like it's more of an emotional, you know, like we as human beings need to be able to take that step and say, you know what, I want to help you. I care about you. I'm sending you this message that I care about you. And personally being able to step in to that uncomfortable situation, I would encourage asking. But if it's more of a professional, then you can definitely utilize the people that you have around you to make that work for the young adult. I hope that answered it.
Thanks, Stephanie. I have another question. Are you aware of any resources for undocumented students who are suicidal and are unable to receive therapy or support due to their status? If they are unable to afford medications, are there alternative options to manage their mental health?
So it varies so much by state. Every time I go to different states, I'm just either blown away by all the resources that they have or sad that there are no resources. But for if the individual is in school or is still under the umbrella of the school district, in Colorado they're eligible to receive those funds. I'm having a hard time answering because I'm not sure about specific states. I can only speak to Colorado, but I know that in Colorado specifically, they have specific components in place for young adults and adults that have come to this nation and are living amongst us that need those types of supports. So I'm not sure for specific states other than for my state, but I would encourage you to look into refugee programs that are usually through your state government offices. That's usually where I've had good luck finding those. Maybe the community-centered boards. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could be more help with that one.
I do have one of our attendees says she does not have a question, but rather additional information. She is from Miami, and when you're in a situation when you would have to call the police, you have to ask for a crisis unit, which are police officers that are specifically trained for these types of situations. Yep,
that's absolutely right, and it definitely looks. Each state is very, very different. So just keep in mind that Florida might have something like that. Colorado definitely has stuff like that, but some of these other states might not. So if you don't, I'm so glad that you have that, and that if any other of your states, just kind of do some research on some of the things that are available around you, because what we might be talking about, you don't have access to, and so that might be something that you can encourage your government offices in order to have as well.
Another question, how do you deal with contacting parents or guardians after a disclosure if the young person is under 18 or has a guardianship?
Yeah, so in the past, kind of how we've handled that particular situation is to, when we're contacting family, a lot of the times it's not something that is foreign to them or not something they haven't already heard. And so one of the things that we do is we all communicate together. We have the student with us, and we're calling, and we talk to the student about why, what our next steps are and why we're communicating with, because some of our students are like, don't tell so-and-so. And we're like, no, we're not doing the secret thing. We're not, that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, where it's like if your friend is telling you something, you do not keep that secret. That is not a secret you can keep ever. So we talk a lot with our students about, because we care about you so much, we are gonna do X, Y, Z, and we're gonna have you have a say in what happens with what moves forward as well in communication with your parents. And sometimes we've had to have one-on-ones with our parents about, you know, I know this is really hard to hear, and I know it's really hard not to take it personal or to roll your eyes sometimes because you've heard it a million zillion times, but one of the things that we really want to encourage is them being able to advocate for their needs and finding, you know, ways to do that and what that looks like for them. And so involving the parent and helping with that self-advocacy and getting them on the right track. And, you know, really involving the student in every step and kind of getting information from the parents and ideas from the parents on how to help, or the guardians on how to help. That's been helpful for us too, in kind of navigating some of those kind of choppy waters sometimes.
Thanks. How frequently people in transition programs struggle with suicidal thoughts? And then there's a follow-up question. What are your thoughts about using host business employee health as a resource in the project search setting? And do these worksite employee health programs have the capacity to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who may have suicidal thoughts? So it's kind of a three part.
Yeah. Yeah. You might have to remind me. I'm going to try and answer
Sure.
as I can, but just kind of keep track and make sure that I am answering the whole question.
Sure.
So I see this happen very, very often in my particular program that I've had at UCHealth for almost we're on our third year right now. And every year we've had at least one person identify with that particular struggle. In my program in particular, our students are additionally assisted by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation as well as their community-centered boards. So they have access to some of those additional services for those supports, as well as at UCHealth, our students are onboarded as employees of UCHealth, and so they do have access and have utilized EAP services in different types of employee wellness services, as well as taking different classes that are offered through the host business. So they have access to anything that they feel that they might need, as well as their families, but that is a host business decision. That is something that UCHealth has made the decision to do. So I can't speak on behalf of all host businesses. I can only speak on behalf of mine. And did I answer all of those questions, Jasmina?
I believe so. So it's
Okay.
It's kind of checking into each project search setting and really kind of knowing what your options are. Yeah,
right.
That makes
Absolutely.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. There's another question. It's not necessarily suicide related, but someone asked, how do you help an intern that has family problems such as family members in jail or mother with mental issues? What do you do when they worry and there's nothing that can be done? And what can you do to help them cope?
Yeah, that's a really hard question, because we have a lot of students that come from a myriad of different backgrounds, and you know, one of the things that when we notice that an intern might be having some struggles at home, we kind of revamp we let them know that they have access to all of these extra things that they need, but also, you know, sometimes just, I don't know, I don't want to say normalizing some of the stress of being worried, right, about the things that are going on in somebody's life, because we all worry about our families sometimes, and we all, no matter if we're an intern or here, have some parts of our family that are harder to navigate through than others. And so we just we encourage a lot of the practicing of, let's acknowledge this feeling as it sits with you right now. Let's acknowledge this real life adult stressor thing that is happening with you right now, and let's do some fact checking about what we can do about it in this moment. And if we do that fact check, and that fact check is we can't do anything about it, then we're going to go about the business of practicing how we can continuously get that being able to focus and do the work that we need to. Because we all don't wake up overnight and go, okay, I have all these terrible things that are going on in my life right now, and I'm just going to be ready for work all the time, because we don't. We all need some sort of that practice that, you know, we wake up and we make a conscious decision to be able to make choices in that day based on what we know. And sometimes it's hour by hour. Sometimes it can be minute by minute. I mean, it just really depends, but we really empower our students to be able to go through the process of being able to work through some of those really hard emotions and hard family situations that they have. Yeah, so that's kind of what we do.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We are at that 1 hour point, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. If you have any questions, if you can stick around for a couple more minutes, put them in the chat box or the question and answer box. And thank you again for attending this wonderful webinar. Please join us again on January 21st for our third webinar, Understanding and Managing Work-Related Anxiety. We will be sending through this through the listserv, so you'll have an opportunity to sign up. Let's see. Someone asked, will we be able to obtain a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, we're going to make that available. Stephanie and I are going to stick around for a few more minutes. Feel free to sign off if you're satisfied, or if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or question and answer box and see if we can answer them for the next couple of minutes. Thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. And thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, guys.
Stephanie, there is another question.
Okay.
They're now threatening suicide if they're not allowed to be together. I realize we can only do what we can while they're with us, but how do we help beyond that?
So I missed part of the first section. So we're talking about students that have left Project Search and how to continue to provide help to them as they've left us?
No, it sounds like they're now threatening suicide. This is about interns who are still in the program, but they're now threatening suicide if they're not allowed to be together.
Oh, like relationship-wise?
Like a romantic or friendship? Or yeah, I'm not sure. Paige, if you can. They're in a long-term relationship and the parents are very against it.
How old are these young adults?
They're extremely codependent, 19.
Okay. So this can be kind of a sticky one because I don't know a whole lot about the situation. I do believe in the dignity of risk, and that includes having relationships, even if it makes us uncomfortable, because in real life it's easier for individuals without a disability to have relationships. And so it makes sense for me when individuals are together and they're becoming very codependent, because that's the only relationship that they've ever had. And I'm having a hard time with this one because I might feel a little bit differently about it because I don't know a whole lot about that particular. But I think I would encourage a conversation about them being able to choose, and unless the relationship is highly problematic and is creating some very negative things for people, I think that having that conversation and saying, here is the reasons why we're feeling this way, and letting them have a voice in their own relationship might help them feel less attacked, because they might be saying that to get what they want out of the relationship, but they might not be. So maybe if they're saying those things, asking them about that plan if they can't be together. So like tell me about, you know, the plan that you have. If you're going to die by suicide because you guys can't be together, what does that look like? And kind of diving a little bit deeper into that. You know, and also another thing I'd encourage is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is actually a really good information to kind of get some of those things, because they've heard and experienced and helped individuals through a lot. So they might be a good avenue for individuals to be able to call and say, I'm experiencing what this I believe to me is a crisis. And so crisis is perspective, right? Some crises are not the same for me or for you. So identifying that with them and helping them work through it with this, you know, I don't want to say stranger, but like this friend that is kind of away from the situation. But I'd certainly, if you guys think that they're serious on their threats to do that, really dig into it and see what it is that if they have a plan or what it is that they're doing. But other than those two things, that's really all I have if it's a danger to them being together.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. In follow-up, the attendee has said we have done that with the interns, and our district social worker and coordinator are involved. They just tell us so much more. So, and then she's thanking you for the time. All right,
sure, of course.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who have stayed on. I think we're going to close it because we're well over. Thanks again, Stephanie. This was really, really informative. All right.
I'm glad
have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.